Now, speaking of the squad, who also don't want me there, I subscribe to the Cobra Kai school of debate. Strike first, strike hard, no mercy. I think some of these people should not be in Congress. I think they're a disgrace. I think some of them shouldn't be Americans. People like Rashida Tlaib, she's just a bad person. She's not a terrorist sympathizer, she's a terrorist. And I don't mind saying it because it's true.
This past week was the week of two special elections, both in Florida. Florida once again in the political spotlight. We had two big wins for both Republicans. Jimmy Patronis, who was in Matt Gaetz' seat in Pensacola. He was chief financial officer of the state of Florida. Great guy. We'll get him on the podcast hopefully soon so you can hear from him what he's trying to accomplish in Congress, etc. Very successful chief financial officer in Florida, very well loved across the state. So it was no surprise there was a ruby red district. Then Randy Fine, who was a state senator, former state rep, won Mike Walz's seat in the 6th congressional district. He won by 14 points, obviously a big win, but actually Trump won that seat by 30. So there were a lot of discussions before the election. The week before, the Democrat raised a lot more money than he did since it was a red seat. I think the Republicans were just comfortable that he was going to win that seat. Turns out they were right, despite the fact that the Democrat raised millions and millions more than he did. Randy Fine still pulled out the victory. And today we're actually going to talk to Randy Fine, the newest congressman from the state of Florida. We're going to talk about what we can learn from his election as Republicans, what Republicans can do better to win in the midterm elections that are really just right around the corner, about what he's trying to accomplish in Congress. He's known as the Hebrew Hammer. It's not a title, a moniker that he came up with, but he is an aggressive defender of the Jewish people and of the state of Israel. At least he was in Tallahassee. And ask him if he's going to take on that same role in Congress. Really just get to know him and what he wants to do. I think one of my favorite things to do is to talk to newly elected officials, see what they want to do, capture some of that excitement, then talk to them a few months or years later and see how things have changed, if they've been able to accomplish those things. Often people want to get a lot done in Congress, but then you get to Washington and it's much tougher than it looks from the outside. I'm actually traveling this week out of the country, so we recorded this past Friday. So thanks for the patience on that. And you guys are definitely going to enjoy this episode and enjoy getting to know Congressman Randy Fine. This is Standpoint, and I'm Gabe Groisman. And before we get started with Congressman Fine, I want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, CUFI, Christians United for Israel. As you know, the landscape in the Middle East is reshaping before our eyes. At the center of it all, of course, is the state of Israel. Our U.S. government's policies towards the Middle East have never been more important, and the time period never more filled with potential and fraught with peril. Remember, Israel's enemies are America's enemies, and the terror organizations determined to annihilate Israel have the same plans for us here in the U.S. I have news for them. They're going to fail. But the Christians United for Israel is America's largest pro-Israel organization. They're leading the charge to help keep America on the right side of God and history. This summer, join me as I join thousands of pro-Israel Americans at the 20th Annual CUFI Washington Summit, June 29th through July 1st. I was there last year and it was spectacular. While you're there, learn from leading policymakers and Middle East experts and make your voices heard on Capitol Hill. Do not be a bystander. Register now for the 20th Annual CUFI Washington Summit at cufi.org with our promo code Standpoint25. That's Standpoint25. And be a part of a movement that's at the forefront of history. Randy Fine, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Randy, first of all, huge congratulations. You were all over the news, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, every paper you could think of the days before the election. But everybody was sort of doubting your ability to win this red seat. You won by a decisive 14 points. It was Mike Walz's seat in the 6th congressional district. We know Trump won it by 30, but Trump is Trump, and this is a special election. It's still a huge win. What are your thoughts just first on the election itself?
Well, we're thrilled with the outcome. Look, we always thought it would be a strong outcome. This is a seat that is rated by Cook at plus 14. I won by 14. I won by the same or more as the two previous congressmen. The first time they won, I won all 6 counties. And so we were thrilled by the outcome. We were never as worried as others, but I think there was a desire both on the part of the media, the Democrats, maybe even some on my side of the world to cast doubt on things. And we were excited to prove them all wrong.
Yeah, so Randy, let's just start from the beginning. I've known you for a long time. You've been in office. You're a state rep, a senator now. So we've done lots of good things together, mostly behind the scenes. But most people don't know who you are, and our audience is outside of Florida. So just give us a couple minutes. Who's Randy Fine?
Well, thanks. Well, so I'm a third generation Floridian, Jewish. My family moved to Florida after they emigrated to the United States. My grandfather grew up in South Florida, son of a vegetable salesman. But my dad's blind, and so he realized that his career options would be limited. So he became a college professor because he knew that was something that someone with eye issues could do. He left to go where he could get tenure. That was at the University of Kentucky. So that's where I grew up. They used to call me a Kentucky Fried Jew. It was not a term of endearment. It was what they wanted to do to me. But I grew up there and left to go to college in the Northeast. And when I was there, I started and grew 3 different companies. I did that for 22 years. That was my career. Retired when I was 40, got angry about what my son was learning in school about a year later, and ended up running for the state legislature in order to go and fix those things. Was in the state house for the full 8 years, subject to term limits. While I did not run expecting to be so focused on our relationship with Israel and fighting anti-Semitism, when I realized I was the only Jew in the majority party, the responsibility to fight for those issues fell to me. And so spent 8 years working on a lot of the things that I think have made Florida the best place in the country to be Jewish. Reached the end of my 8 years, ran for the state Senate, just got elected 5 months ago in November. And then 2 weeks after my election, President Trump asked me to run for Congress to replace Mike Waltz. And so we just had this extraordinary, basically 4-month campaign, 2 campaigns in 4 months. First, we had a primary, then we had a general, and won on Tuesday, got sworn in on Wednesday, and here we are now.
Incredible. You skipped over two points that I want to get. You said you went to school in the Northeast. The reason you're not proud of the school you went to, we can get to that. But where you were at Harvard, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I went to Harvard twice. Now people usually think that's a big deal and people brag about it, but I have to remind people I grew up in Kentucky. It's easier to get in when you're from Kentucky than it might be in other places, and so I went up there as kind of the Kentucky boy. Spent 4 years as an undergraduate. Started my first business. It became fairly successful. So I was the first person admitted directly from Harvard College to Harvard Business School in several decades. And so I went and then got my MBA there as well, and graduated #1 in my class.
What was that? What was that business, Randy?
My first company dealt with energy efficiency and helped large institutions restructure how they used energy, using the savings to pay for the energy efficiency improvements that they did. And I really came up with the idea as a vehicle to help pay my way for school.
Wow, and that's actually an issue that's super relevant today to so many companies with the cost of energy going up and different elements that hopefully you'll get to deal with in Congress. Before we get into your time in Congress, you just went through these elections. You just went through a congressional election post Trump's win. It's almost a preview in a way to the midterms that are just like a year and a half away. What lessons do you think Republicans can learn to be successful in the midterms next year?
You know, I challenge the premise that the Florida elections, I can't speak to the one in Wisconsin, but I challenge the premise that there's that much to learn from these elections, because they're special elections and Republicans generally don't vote in special elections. What I would tell people that they could learn is this: Democrats are really, really, really angry. I believe if you did a survey of the voters in my district, they like President Trump more today than they did on November the 5th. What's changed is that Democrats are really mad, so they'll walk over hot coals in order to vote. Whereas Republicans are a little bit more complacent. They feel like everything's fine. Donald Trump got elected. He's the president. He's fixing everything. All is right in the world. And anger is a strong motivator to vote. And when you're feeling good about things, you may not make a special trip. But I believe that by next November, when people are planning to vote, they know it's time to vote, I think we'll see the patterns revert to the mean. And so I wouldn't read too much into this other than the fact that Democrats are extremely motivated, Republicans a little bit less so. I don't think anybody's minds have been changed, though. That's certainly the sense that I got as I campaigned for the last few months.
Yeah, but actually the dynamic, just to push back a little, the political theory, I guess, but is the dynamic that you describe is so often the dynamic in midterm elections. The party who won, they're happy. They don't really go out in midterms as much as they do on the main elections because they're guys in the White House. And the other party, the people of the other party, are so pissed off at who's in the White House, whoever it is on any side. So they turn out more. There's more fundraising. There's more energy. So that's why I think the dynamic may be similar. The huge difference is special elections. Everybody knows, just to get someone to go vote, to even know about a special election, to go out and vote on a special election. Even in Florida, where there's early voting and lots of opportunities to vote, it's still tough to get them out there.
Yeah, and that did happen. And so I guess the takeaway is, if you support President Trump, if you're on that side of the world, we have to meet their anger with our concern over what would happen if we don't win. And that was really what our messaging was. We would say to voters, we know that you're really happy, and you should be, because President Trump is winning. But here's what would happen if I would lose. They would stop his agenda. They would impeach him. All the good things you like would stop. And people went, oh, really? Well, I better go and vote. And so really there's a messaging thing. But what I don't want people to take away from these election results, and which the liberal media would try to tell you to do, is that President Trump's popularity has dropped. It has not. There's just a difference in intensity among the two sides. That's all it is. But the people who haven't voted, if you survey everyone, I think you're going to see very similar things as November. We just have to make sure our side feels as intense as their side does. We do those things, the midterms are going to be great.
For sure. So just like you said, 72 hours ago, you were a candidate. Now you're sworn in.
Yeah,
you're home for the first weekend. This is. I
got home an hour ago.
Yeah, this is being recorded on Friday. I'm very transparent with the listeners, but mostly because, first of all, it's good to be transparent, but second of all, because the news cycles move so fast. This episode will drop on Tuesday. You're jumping on a moving train, right, Randy? This is not a this. You're coming in a moment where the train is moving probably 200 miles an hour with the Trump agenda. Those who support it are excited about it. Those who don't or not, and there's a lot of people in the middle trying to figure out what's happening. The big story of the day is the tariffs, right? We had a Liberation Day, was coined Liberation Day this week. Lots of tariffs were put into place. What are your thoughts on the tariffs? I heard you talk a little bit about it on the news this morning, but maybe a little bit deeper. We're seeing obviously a big response from China, a big response from the marketplace. I've spoken to a few business owners today, someone who manufactures furniture, other people who manufacture other items abroad. They're trying to figure out how things are going to land. What's your take on the tariffs, their impact, and what their goals are, and whether we'll meet them?
Well, look, I think President Trump, as he does in many things, is creating an existential threat to the world order that takes advantage of the United States. By the way, apparently tariffs are a great idea when other countries do them to us. Then it's a great idea. But when we respond and say, okay, we can do this too, then it's a terrible idea. I think President Trump is trying to accomplish three things. The first is he is saying America deserves to compete on the same level. You are not going to put tariffs on our goods, but we won't on yours. That's not going to happen. And so part of what he's doing is he's saying, drop your tariffs. We'll do the same. The second thing he's trying to do is he's trying to say there are certain goods that should simply be made in the United States. We should not depend on China for medical supplies and prescription drugs. We could not hold them accountable during COVID because of their behavior. And that's a mistake. There's a national security issue. And then the third thing is, honestly, if you thought about it, a tariff is simply a sales tax on foreign goods. And if we could replace U.S. income taxes with sales taxes on foreign goods, that would be a huge win for our country. So people have to think about it that way. But I don't think these tariffs will last long term. I think these countries will relent. President Trump usually wins. I think that he will say, look, we're not doing this anymore. We're not letting you put tariffs on our stuff. If you do that, we're going to do the same. I think they will back down, and I think everything will be fine.
I mean, it's all about how the market reacts, and that market includes the financial markets, the business markets, like Wall Street, but also the other countries, and see how they're responding. China, I think, by adding 34% on top of what they already charge as a reflex, I think that's going to backfire really quickly. The only qualm I have, feel like the administration's doing great things, but they're moving too quickly. And when they move too quickly, they make some mistakes. We spoke about a couple weeks ago here on the show. There was a cut. You weren't in Congress yet, but 57% of the congressionally directed medical research program, and lots of important programs got cut to zero from one day to the next. And just putting more thought into what's going on in the cuts. And similarly here with the tariffs, where, for example, Israel, just by example, and there's other countries, I think Vietnam is another one, where they still got the tariff, 17%, to try to counter tariffs that Israel had in place. But the day before, Israel had wiped out all their tariffs. So it seems like, from where I sit, and we'll see if by the time this airs next week, if it'll have been resolved, it seems from where I sit, it's either optics, which are very important to the president, or they just moved too fast and weren't able to absorb then these people who made those changes already before the announcement.
I would push back on two things. And obviously, you're not going to find any bigger champion for Israel in Congress than me. But I would say two things. Number one, great that they dropped the tariffs the day before, but everybody knew this day was coming. And choosing to drop them the day before might have been doing it too late. Maybe had they done it a week or 2 or 3 weeks before, there would have been time to build that in before the plan. Acting at the last minute oftentimes doesn't work. But the second thing I would say is they're not acting too quickly. You have, for the first time in American history, a government run by entrepreneurs working at entrepreneurial speed, at startup speed. This is what has made America the envy of the world, is how our startups work. You work fast, you adjust, you make little mistakes, you adjust their strategy. They're moving like a Silicon Valley startup, which is amazing for the biggest effectively organization in the world, the US government. And you make mistakes along the way and you adjust quickly. I would rather it be this way than the government that takes months and months and years and years and years to do anything. You make a mistake, you adjust, and you keep going. This is look, Elon Musk is an entrepreneur. Donald Trump is an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. That's the careers that we know. So this method of management, this is what we know, not the government plan of making 1,000 excuses to take any action so you never change anything. Change is hard, and I think you see the consequences of it. But I'm very optimistic that on the other side of these tariffs, we're going to be making the right products in the United States, and we're going to be saying to other countries, we're going to have one set of rules. It's not going to be one set of rules when we want to send stuff to you, but a different set when you send it to us. Those days are over.
So you have a moniker, your name, that people know about in Florida. They haven't found out about it yet in Washington. I know you didn't give it to yourself,
No.
but lots of times it comes out in the press. I see you nodding your head. They call you the Hebrew Hammer. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative, but it has to do with how aggressively you defend our people, which is why I respect you so much, especially in that arena, because I think in the Jewish community, we always like to fight with lots of gloves on, wraps and gloves and heavy gloves, where our enemies go bare knuckle. And you really take that strong response. That would have been a big, surprise for Washington, because that's not how Washington handled things. And I'm using the past tense because it seems like now you're going to fit right in. I wanted to jump quickly to Secretary of State Rubio, who we all know well, our former U.S. Senator from Florida, who has been leading the charge to deport students, visa holders who are out there wreaking havoc, making everyone's lives miserable. What do you have to say about that, and how excited are you to get involved in those processes now that you're in Washington?
It shows you how far we have fallen as a country that this is even controversial. I mean, you come as a guest to our country and you act like a jerk, you ought to be sent home. Your behavior should have to be pristine. You're a guest. But the difference between the right and the left operates from this presumption that everyone in the world, all 6 billion people, should have the right to come to the United States whenever they want and get every free thing that has ever been promised to anyone. They live in a fantasy world where money grows on trees. I think if you come to this country, you should be on your best behavior. And if you're not, you should get sent home. I don't think we should feel bad about it. I think they should be cleaning out a lot of these people. They have no right to be here. They are our guests. And when I go into somebody else's house, I am respectful. These people aren't. They should be thrown out. And I cheer every time it happens.
I'm recalling an interview last week, and I'm smiling about it, with I keep saying Senator Rubio, but Secretary Rubio, And the reporter calls out the number of students that have been deported so far. And he says, that's it. It should be a lot more. But don't worry. Soon the goal is it's going to be zero because we already have thrown out all the troublemakers and we'll be zero after that. And I think that's really the new attitude of this administration. But, there's a lot more layers to this. There's foreign money, like, in universities. There's foreign money on social media. That's not just foreign individuals. It's foreign governments that are influencing and impacting our day-to-day lives here. But you have lots of new, interesting colleagues in Washington. I know you've only been there a few days. You probably haven't gotten to meet all of them yet.
No.
But the first that I think of is the squad. And the squad keeps getting bigger. It used to be a small fringe. We saw today, which will be last week once this airs, even on the Senate side, we had a third of the Senate Democrats voting with Bernie Sanders to stop arms to Israel. They knew it wasn't going to pass. It was just a statement. But on your side of the Capitol, on the House, you've got the squad, and they're worse than all 15 of those put together. How's the Hebrew Hammer? How's Congressman Randy Fine going to deal with the squad?
Well, I'm going to answer that, but I want to jump back to what you said about money from around the world. We saw that in my election. My opponent, who is a convert to Islam and is a full hardcore jihadist, did not believe in Israel, thought Palestine should be recognized from the river to the sea, all of that stuff. He raised more money per day than anyone has ever raised running for Congress. He raised $14 million in 2 months, like $250,000 a day. And he raised it all on Act Blue, which is a platform where you don't know where the money came from. So if you give money to a Republican candidate on something called WinRed, your credit card, the name on your credit card has to match the name that you're giving for the address. But on Act Blue, they let people use prepaid debit cards. So I could go buy $100 prepaid debit card, and I could give $100 from you, Gabe, to Ilhan Omar, and you'd never know because it doesn't show up on your credit card statement. It wouldn't show up on your credit report. The only way you'd know is if you happen to go search campaign finance records. So in the case of my opponent, again, you had the Hebrew Hammer running against a guy who basically said death to Israel. How much of the $14 million even came from the United States? We don't know, but it's a suspicious amount of money. And I think that's what you're talking about in foreign influence. And I'll be digging into it because it is my belief that there's no way this guy raised $14 million, $250,000 a day without help from a lot of people who really would like there not to be someone like me in Congress. Now, speaking of the squad, who also don't want me there, look, they're not going to like it very much. I subscribe to the Cobra Kai school of debate. Strike first, strike hard, no mercy. The squad equivalents in the Florida legislature learned about it real quick. I think some of these people should not be in Congress. I think they're a disgrace. I think some of them shouldn't be Americans. I don't think they love our country. And I'm not going to be afraid to call them out and go right at them because I think they're bad people. And I particularly people like Rashida Tlaib. She's just a bad person. She's not a terrorist sympathizer. She's a terrorist. And I don't mind saying it because it's true.
Well, they're going to know you're in Congress once you're there. That's for sure.
They
Just
are.
to go back to
yes,
your comment on Act Blue, are you going to be launching an investigation on them?
Well, they're already investigating it in the House. I will probably push to do it faster because I think my experience shows the depth of the problem. Now, maybe this guy really did raise $14 million from California and Seattle and Washington. By their own estimate, by their own statements, I believe, I read an article today, they say 92% of the money didn't come from Florida, but they claim it came from the United States. And I just want to look into that. You should not be able to give money to a political candidate on a prepaid debit card. That should be against the law. And so there's work to be done there. Just the amount of money that flowed to this guy, it was very, very suspect.
Yeah, there have been some documentaries online, at least through social media, and I don't know how in depth they were or not. Just people going knocking on doors when old ladies had given daily to Act Blue and they didn't even know about it. Right, people were giving in their names. So it's important, I think, for America to look at that. And it's one thing that's interesting in Congress today, and you're going to feel it firsthand, and this as well, is that the Democrats in particular have just become oppositional. Whatever the Republicans are for, they're against. So they find themselves defending things like people like Mahmoud Khalil and others. And here in this sense, they're going to be defending Act Blue because that's just their reflex automatically to defend that organization that so many of them benefit from. But it's critical to uncover it, because I think that's going to be the storyline. If it's up to me, the storyline of Congress in the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to be about uncovering foreign influence on our country, on our elections, on our students, on our teachers, on our government. There's so much there. But look, we always focus on the left, all of us on the right, and the problems that are on the left, and rightly so. It keeps getting worse and worse. It's terrible for our country. In our own house on the Republican side, we have some issues. We have our friend Thomas Massey from Kentucky, your new colleague, who's also no friend of the Jewish community or of Israel, has been super problematic. I'm not afraid to say it. I've said it and written about it many times. How are you going to deal with those dynamics?
Well, the only one I know who's a real problem is Thomas Massey, and I don't think we're going to get along very well. I've called him an embarrassment to the Republican Party publicly. I don't expect that will change. The good news is what Jews have known about Thomas Massey, I think all Republicans know about Thomas Massey now. I mean, President Trump's not a fan, and I don't think the caucus is a fan. So he's the one that I know is really problematic. Beyond that, I guess I'll find out. But look, I think part of being a fighter for Jews is to not only call it out when the other side does it, but to call it out when your own side does it.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's my final question. You're starting now, new role, new position, lots of new levers to pull of things that you want to accomplish. I think I know you pretty well, and I'm pretty sure you've thought of this. Tell me a little bit about what you're going to look to accomplish, at least in your first couple of years in Congress. You yourself, Randy Fine.
Yeah. Well, I think there's going to be two things. Number one is to help the Trump agenda, get the Trump agenda passed. I believe you got to support the team captain. He's the team captain. The way Florida became an overwhelmingly Republican-run state was by having 25 years of people in charge who proved they could govern and hitting singles and doubles and triples every day. We didn't go from a 61-59 state house to an 87-33 overnight. We picked up a few seats every time, and it was because we showed the voters that we could govern. That's important. The second thing is I think you'll see me as a voice for Israel and fighting anti-Semitism. It's in my DNA. It's who I am. People expect me to do that. And I think that's part of why President Trump asked me to run, because he wanted that voice. He wanted the Hebrew hammer to come. And I will absolutely be focused on doing those things.
Well, Randy Fine, thank you so much for joining us. It's your first week in office. It's a huge honor to have you on the show. You're a friend. I wish you nothing but success. Congrats on the win. Get a little bit of rest this weekend, and I know you're going to hit the ground running on Monday. Thank you so much.
This will be the most restful Shabbat ever.
Absolutely. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
and for the rest of you, make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and do all the great things you do to support podcasts, and we'll see you next time.